Question. Would a way to controlling negative emotions be trying to understand why a thing happened, to understand cause and effect? Ouspensky. It may be in some particular case, but at present there is no question of destroying or controlling. The question is of studying. The strongest method for controlling negative emotions is learning not to express them. So we must first struggle with the expression of negative emotions, and second, with such emotions as we can struggle with. When we learn not to express them, we will speak of the next step. You cannot control negative emotions as long as they have free expression. I want you to understand that stopping the expression of negative emotions and struggle with negative emotions are two quite different practices. Trying to stop the expression comes first. If you express a negative emotion, you are in its power. You can do nothing at that moment. When you have learned not to express it, you can try not to identify, to create a right attitude, and to remember yourself. Question. I can sometimes manage not to express a negative emotion to begin with, but it goes on trying to come out. Ouspensky. This means you only stopped the external manifestation, and you must try to stop the cause of it. I do not mean the cause of the emotion itself, but the cause of the expression. There is a difference. Emotion is one thing, expression is another. Try to find the difference. Question. Does trying to control unpleasant emotions gradually eliminate them? Ouspensky. Certainly, because many of them can exist only when there is no control. The moment control begins, many of them become easy to eliminate. Question. Is the point not to feel unpleasant emotions? Ouspensky. That comes later. It is quite a separate question. You come to that by not identifying. Question. By what means can one check where one's unpleasant emotions come from? What causes them? And how we are to get over our tendency to deceive ourselves? Ouspensky. At present, it is not important to learn where they come from. It is important to stop their expression. Many things about negative emotions can be learned afterwards. As to what causes them, identification is the general cause of all negative emotions. You cannot struggle with negative emotions without help. Many people have tried. If you realized how small our possibility is, you would understand that one must have every possible help to achieve something. Question. Must negative emotions always be mechanical? Ouspensky. What is opposite to mechanical? Conscious. Who will have negative emotions consciously? When you know that you can give them up, nobody would have them. So certainly they are mechanical. Question. Could we hear more about right attitudes as a weapon against negative emotions? It must mean more than just not identifying. Ouspensky. Certainly, it means more. It means right thinking on a definite subject. For instance, almost all our personal negative emotions are based on accusation. Somebody else is guilty. If, by persistent thinking, we realize that nobody can be guilty against us, that we are the cause of all that happens to us, this changes things. Not at once, certainly, because many times this realization will come too late. But after some time, this right thinking, this creating of right attitude or point of view, can become a permanent process. Then negative emotions will appear only occasionally. Exactly by being permanent, this process of right thinking has power over negative emotions. It catches them in the beginning. Question. I find that much of my time is passed in a negative state, and I don't seem to be able to do anything about it. Ouspensky. Yes, but you must have realized that it is generally connected with some kind of identification or imagination. When you find different manifestations of this negative state, you can struggle with it because this struggle is in the mind. You can refuse some points of view and accept other points of view, and very soon you will see a difference. This is also connected with a very big question, because from one point of view, we are so mechanical that we can do nothing. But from another point of view, there are several things which we can begin to do. We have certain possibilities in us, only we do not use them. It is true that we cannot do anything in the sense that we cannot change what we feel at any given moment, but we can make ourselves think about a subject at a given moment. This is the beginning. We must know what is possible and begin from that, because then the possibility to do something, instead of letting things happen, will gradually increase. We do not realize what enormous power lies in this kind of thinking. I don't mean this as a philosophical explanation of power. The power lies in the fact that if we always think rightly about certain things, we can make it permanent. It can grow into a permanent attitude. You may find some inclination to wrong emotional manifestations of some kind. Just at that moment you can do nothing. You have educated in yourself the capacity for this kind of reaction by wrong thinking. But if you start from right thinking, then after some time you'll be able to educate yourself in the capacity for a different reaction. Only this method has to be understood, and this understanding must be quite deep. You can apply this method to many different things. This is really the one thing you can do. There's no direct way to struggle with negative manifestations because you cannot catch them, and there's no way to prevent them except by being prepared for them beforehand. But a passing realization that they are wrong will not help. It must be very deep. Otherwise you'll have an equally difficult process to prepare the ground for another manifestation. You don't realize how much you lose by these spontaneous manifestations of a negative character. They make so many things impossible. Question. Even if I do begin to think rightly, I find imitation starts when I hear somebody else grumbling, and then I begin to do the same. Ouspensky. The fact that you begin to think rightly will not change anything straight away. It is necessary to think rightly for a long time. Then results will come, but not at once. It is a question of months or years to create right attitudes. By creating right attitudes, you consolidate the fact that you have really and seriously decided not to give way to negative manifestations. We do not realize how much we lose in this way. We lose exactly what we want to get. But first of all, you must stop the habit of expressing negative emotions. This is why, in the very first lectures, when you hear about self-observation, it is explained that you must learn not to express negative emotions. Everybody knows how not to show what they feel. I don't mean in exceptional cases, but in ordinary cases. All negativeness is based on identification, imagination, and on one particular feature, namely, allowing yourself to express it. You always believe you cannot stop it, and therefore feel it is quite right to show what you feel. So first, you must get rid of this illusion. You can stop the manifestations of negative emotions. If you say, I don't want to, I will believe you. But not if you say, I cannot. I've given you many suggestions about work on emotions, such as study, struggle with identification, struggle with the expression of negative emotions, and right thinking about negative emotions. 4 practices. If you really use all of this, very soon you'll see quite perceptible results. Real control of the emotional center needs self-remembering, a new state of consciousness. So it is a long way off. Now we must use auxiliary methods, and the most important of them in the beginning is a right attitude. Question: what is the relationship between self-remembering and negative emotions? Ouspensky: when negative emotions appear, self-remembering becomes impossible. So to remember yourself, you must have a certain control of negative emotions. As a matter of fact, people are not equal in this respect. Some have more, some less control, even of the expression. And not only of the expression, for some people have more control of their emotions, while some can control only certain emotions. And only those who have a certain control of negative emotions can work on self-remembering and get good results. At the same time, this control can be attained. You can begin from different sides, and if certain self-remembering is created, this immediately helps you to struggle with negative emotions. And struggle with negative emotions helps self-remembering. Question: in struggling with identification, is it necessary to know why one is identified? Ouspensky: one is identified not for any particular reason or purpose, and in all cases, because you cannot help it. How can you know why you identify? But you must know why you struggle. This is the thing. If you do not forget the reason why you're struggling against identification, you'll be 10 times more successful. Very often we begin struggling and then forget why. There are also many forms of identification, but the first step is to see it. The second step is to struggle with it in order to become free from it. It is a process, not a moment. We are in it all the time. We spend our energy in the wrong way on identification and negative emotions. They are open taps from which our energy flows out. Question: can one think of identification as a negative state that can only be caused by negative emotions? Ouspensky: no, not quite like that. Identification is a necessary element in every negative emotion. You cannot have a negative emotion without identification. So the study of identification and struggle against identification are very powerful weapons in the struggle with negative emotions. Sometimes you cannot struggle with a negative emotion directly, but by trying not to identify, you diminish its power. For all the power of negative emotions lies in identification and imagination. So when you separate identification and imagination, the negative emotion practically disappears, or at any rate, it changes. Question: so to fight against negative emotions themselves, we have to observe more and work against the strong identification with the emotions. Ouspensky: yes. We will speak about methods of struggling with emotions themselves, because there are many and very definite methods, different for different emotions. But first you must struggle with negative imagination and identification. This is quite sufficient to destroy many of the usual negative emotions. In any case, it will make them much lighter. You must start with this because it is only possible to begin using stronger methods when you can struggle with identification to a certain extent, and when you have already stopped negative imagination. That must be stopped completely. It is useless to study further methods until that is done. Negative imagination you can stop, and even the study of identification will diminish it. You must try to avoid identification as often as you can, not only in relation to negative emotions, but in relation to everything. If you create in yourself the capacity of not identifying, this will affect emotions, and you will notice that they begin to disappear. Identification is the atmosphere in which negative emotions live, and they cannot live without it. Question: is what the system calls false personality also based on negative emotions? Ouspensky: there are many other things in false personality besides negative emotions. For instance, there are always bad mental habits. False personality, or parts of false personality, are always based on wrong thinking. Although to a certain extent you are right. In some cases, if you take negative emotions away from false personality, it collapses, for it cannot live without them. On the other hand, some false personalities can function on most pleasant emotions. There are very cheerful false personalities, and in this way your false personality can deceive you and make you believe that you are struggling with negative emotions. It can deceive you in many different ways. Question: do all negative emotions spring from false personality? Ouspensky: how could it be otherwise? It is, so to speak, a special organ for negative emotions, for displaying, enjoying, and producing them. You remember I said there is no real center for negative emotions. False personality acts as a center for them. Question: what is the second conscious shock that changes the character of the factory? Ouspensky: if you like, I can tell you what it is, but it will not help because it is precisely what we cannot do. It is the transformation of negative emotions into positive emotions. It is possible only with long work on self-remembering, when you can be conscious for a long time, and when higher emotional center begins to work. This is what brings us to the state of man number 5. So it is very far from where we are now. But the energy behind negative emotions, combined with a special effort, can produce positive emotion. Question: it seems to me that to produce any useful results in the directions of being more awake, it's necessary for both of the conscious shocks to be working. Ouspensky: yes, to produce complete results, certainly both shocks must be given. But when the first shock is sufficiently strong, it already produces certain results. But they generally work together, because from the very beginning, we must learn not to express negative emotions, and this is already work on the second conscious shock. The first shock is in the nature of self-remembering, and then it produces struggle with negative emotions. So after some time, one actually works on both. The more results you get in one, the more you have to work on the other. This explains another principle we meet within this system, that the more you do, the more is expected of you. The more you work on self-remembering, the more you must be able to control negative emotions, with the idea of being able in the future to transform negative emotions into positive emotions. But this is very far because one has to have a great deal of material created for self-remembering. All the same, the two shocks are connected, and in a way, the one cannot work without the other. The first conscious shock prepares for the second, and the second prepares for the first. It is all simultaneous. You do not finish one and pass to the other. Question: are there negative emotions in the higher emotional center? Ouspensky: in higher centers there are no positive and negative parts, and there is no division between intellectual and emotional. Higher emotional center is only called emotional. On higher levels, what is emotional is also intellectual, and what is intellectual is emotional. Work of higher centers is very different from work of ordinary centers, the 4 lower centers. We can sometimes observe this work and the different taste of it in moments of self-consciousness when we become temporarily connected with the higher emotional center. But so long as certain negative emotions exist in us, higher centers cannot work, and they should not work, for it would be a disaster. Of course, we could have much more energy than we have if we did not waste it on negative emotions and other useless things. For instance, if you lose energy on negative emotions or on mechanical actions or mechanical thinking, then this energy is lost. But if you use energy for struggling with mechanicalness, you get it back. This is how energy is accumulated.